Soren Blackwood strode through the bustling concourse of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport with his customary air of confidence. Clad in a tailored navy suit and leather briefcase in hand, the billionaire CEO of Blackwood Enterprises was used to the predictable precision of his daily routine, catching flights, sealing deals, and commanding respect with every step he took. That crisp autumn morning, however, something unforeseen disrupted his meticulously planned path. As he navigated a throng of hurried travelers, Soren's mind was occupied with merger details and investor calls, his gaze fixed ahead. Amid the sea of rolling luggage and shuffling feet, a sudden collision jolted him from his reverie. Before he could register what was happening, his arm reflexively swung around, embracing a stranger in a spontaneous, instinctive gesture. For an eternity that felt both absurd and strangely significant, the two collided, Soren's firm grip wrapping around the woman's waist, pulling her into his personal space. Startled, the woman stiffened and then slowly drew back, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and bemusement. "I'm so sorry," Soren stuttered, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady as he pulled his arm away. He expected angry glares or curt apologies, but instead, he met a soft, inquisitive look that made his heart inexplicably pause. The woman's auburn hair framed a face that was at once both delicate and determined, and as she adjusted the strap of her shoulder bag, she offered a tentative smile. "No harm done," she replied, her tone light yet carrying an undercurrent of amusement. For a moment, time seemed to slow as Soren searched her eyes for clues, as if trying to remember a half-forgotten dream. The name tag on her bag read, Marigold Fairfax, a name that echoed with a rare, almost lyrical quality in his mind. His carefully controlled world, one of cold logic and ruthless ambition, suddenly felt disturbed by an emotion he hadn't expected to encounter. Flustered yet unable to ignore the spark that had ignited within him, Soren found himself hesitating as Marigold began to step away. In that brief pause, the chaotic background of airport announcements and rolling suitcases faded into insignificance. The accidental embrace, so brief and unplanned, had left a mark on him, one that was both bewildering and oddly captivating. His pulse quickened as he realized he wasn't simply apologizing, he was searching for a connection in a world he'd long deemed unfeeling. Marigold glanced over her shoulder, her expression softening with curiosity. "Are you always this clumsy?" she teased, a playful lilt in her voice that belied the initial shock. Soren managed a weak smile, his usual eloquence slipping away. "Not usually," he admitted, "but today, I seem to have lost my way." Without fully understanding why, Soren felt compelled to ask, "Can I at least know your name?" His tone was earnest, tinged with vulnerability, a stark contrast to the polished facade he maintained in boardrooms. "I'm Marigold Fairfax," she said simply, as if stating the most obvious fact in the world. For a split second, their eyes locked, and in that quiet intersection of fate, both wondered if this brief encounter was more than mere accident. Before Marigold could continue, a sudden burst of airport chatter and the call of a departing flight pulled them apart. Soren hesitated at the threshold, watching as she melted into the crowd, leaving behind a trail of curiosity in the lingering warmth of a connection he hadn't anticipated. Standing there, amid the organized chaos of departure gates and rolling suitcases, Soren felt a rare uncertainty settle in his heart, a feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, an accidental embrace might have rewritten the rules of his carefully measured existence. And so, as the plane took off and the airport resumed its ceaseless rhythm, Soren Blackwood clutched his name tag and phone, silently vowing to find Marigold Fairfax again. He had no idea that this moment would set him on a path that would challenge his lifelong commitment to emotional detachment, opening his world to a love that was as unexpected as it was transformative. Soren Blackwood couldn't shake the memory of that unexpected embrace. For days after the encounter at the airport, he found his thoughts constantly drifting back to Marigold Fairfax, the way her hazel eyes had softened his usually impenetrable facade, the hint of playfulness in her voice that defied his routine, calculated existence. In his penthouse office overlooking the sprawling city, Soren sat alone at his mahogany desk, scrolling through social media feeds, trying desperately to trace any clue of her identity. Every search returned blank, as if Marigold were a phantom designed only to haunt him with possibility. Determined to reclaim the connection that had so abruptly jolted him from his daily grind, Soren summoned his most trusted assistant, Darian Cole. Over a cup of black coffee in the sleek, modern confines of his office, he explained the situation in a hushed, urgent tone. "Darian, I met someone at the airport, Marigold Fairfax. I need to find her. I want to know who she is, what she does, everything." Darian's eyes widened at the unusual request, and he hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I'll run a thorough search, sir. I'll comb through flight records, social media, and any public mentions. Perhaps there's a connection we can trace." For Soren, every minute felt like an eternity. As he waited for Darian's preliminary report, he paced the polished floor of his office, replaying that fateful moment in his mind. He recalled how the world around him had suddenly faded into a blur of airport announcements and rolling suitcases, leaving only the startling clarity of Marigold's eyes. That fleeting touch, though accidental, had unsettled him deeply, challenging everything he had built his life upon. By late afternoon, Darian returned with a stack of printed reports and a tablet full of tentative leads. "There are a few social media profiles that mention a Marigold Fairfax, but nothing conclusive," Darian explained, his tone professional yet sympathetic. "One profile on an independent art blog lists an Arden or Marigold, could be her. I also found a small ad in a local magazine that might be connected." Soren's heart raced at the possibility that a lead existed. He scrutinized each detail, noting a vague reference to an art exhibit in Soho and a brief mention of a creative director known for her passion for experimental art. Though the evidence was sparse, it was enough to ignite a spark of hope. That evening, unable to shake the obsession, Soren decided to take matters into his own hands. Disguising his billionaire status with a simple black jacket and sunglasses, he headed to Soho, a neighborhood known for its edgy galleries and bohemian spirit. The streets pulsed with the rhythm of street performers and lively chatter. Soren moved through the urban landscape with the quiet determination of a man on a secret mission, every step measured as if the answer to his search lay hidden among the art and the people. At a modest gallery tucked between a vintage record store and an independent coffee shop, Soren paused to glance at a display of contemporary paintings. The small space was filled with vibrant colors and curious sculptures, a stark contrast to the corporate minimalism he was used to. As he wandered the exhibit, he found himself drawn to a striking installation that featured a series of portraits of women, each captured with raw emotion and an undeniable sense of individuality. Then, in the corner of the gallery, he spotted a familiar figure. Marigold, or someone who looked remarkably like her, stood engaged in conversation with an artist, her eyes alight with the same playful spark he remembered. Soren's pulse quickened. He lingered at the edge of the exhibit, watching as she laughed softly at a remark, her auburn hair catching the light. With a mixture of trepidation and resolve, he approached her once more. "Excuse me," he said gently, his voice more tentative than his usual commanding tone. The woman turned, and for an excruciating moment, time seemed to halt as recognition flickered in her eyes. "Marigold," he ventured, scarcely daring to hope. She regarded him, a smile slowly forming, and replied, "I suppose fate has its peculiar ways." In that unexpected reunion, amidst the hum of whispered critiques and soft indie music, Soren realized that his accidental embrace had unlocked something far greater than a mere infatuation. It had opened the door to rediscovering a connection that had once meant everything. As they spoke quietly about art, life, and the strange currents of chance, Soren felt a sense of vulnerability that he had long believed was his weakness. It was, in truth, a chance to rewrite his own narrative, a journey from a man defined solely by power and precision to someone willing to risk his carefully guarded heart for the promise of real, transformative love. With the gallery's lights dimming and the night drawing in, Soren and Marigold agreed to meet again, to continue exploring this newfound connection that defied all logic. And as he left the gallery that night, Soren couldn't help but smile at the thought that sometimes, a single, accidental hug might lead to the most unexpected turn in life, a chance to finally embrace the possibility of love. Soren's heart raced as he stepped into the warmly lit gallery, the ambient hum of soft indie music and murmured conversation wrapping around him like a gentle cloak. Every exhibit, every carefully curated display of contemporary art, seemed to pulse with creative energy, and with a promise of serendipity. He had come to Soho with a determined purpose, but the thought of seeing Marigold again had given his every step a hesitant, almost trembling quality. As he moved through the gallery, his eyes scanned the room for any sign of the elusive Marigold Fairfax. It wasn't long before he noticed her. She stood by a large abstract painting, her auburn curls catching the light as she studied the vivid strokes and chaotic patterns with an expression that balanced curiosity and quiet contemplation. Soren paused, feeling as if the universe had momentarily stilled. He could hardly believe his eyes. There, amidst a throng of art enthusiasts and critics, was the woman who had so unexpectedly invaded his carefully ordered life at the airport. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her, yet unable to contain the surge of emotion that threatened to break his practiced composure. "Marigold," he ventured softly, his voice almost lost amid the gentle clinking of glasses and low conversation. She turned, and for a long moment, their eyes met, her hazel eyes shimmering with a mixture of surprise, amusement, and a trace of recognition that lit up her face. "Soren Blackwood," she replied, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "I was beginning to think you'd never show up again." A spark of relief and exhilaration shot through him. The awkward incident at the airport, which had seemed like a minor blip in his otherwise impeccable routine, had led him here, to this moment that felt as though it had been written in the stars. They moved to a quieter corner of the gallery, away from the bustling crowd. Over glasses of sparkling water and a shared appreciation of the art that decorated the room, their conversation began with cautious pleasantries. Yet beneath the surface, the energy between them was palpable, a current of unspoken questions and tentative hope. Marigold confessed, with a wry laugh, that she had never expected to be recognized at a high-end art exhibit, let alone to have a chance encounter with someone as enigmatic as Soren. "I remember that hug at the airport," she said, her tone teasing yet sincere. "It was so unexpected that for a moment, I wondered if I had stepped into some kind of alternate reality." Soren's cheeks warmed at her playful tone. "I still can't believe I made that mistake," he admitted. "I was so focused on my business that I failed to see the world around me, and it turns out, it was trying to tell me something important." Their conversation flowed effortlessly from that point onward. They discussed their contrasting worlds, Soren's disciplined, high-pressure life at the helm of Blackwood Enterprises, and Marigold's free-spirited, creative journey as a rising art director at a boutique design firm. She spoke passionately about her love for art and her belief in the transformative power of creativity, while he recounted stories of boardroom battles and the relentless pace of mergers and acquisitions. Despite the differences in their backgrounds, both discovered a surprising overlap in their innermost desires, an unspoken longing for connection, authenticity, and a break from the isolation that their worlds often imposed. As the evening wore on, the initial excitement gave way to a deeper, more reflective dialogue. In the soft glow of the gallery's dimmed lights, Soren confessed that despite his success, he often felt hollow, a man whose heart had been locked away behind layers of ambition and fear. "I've spent so many years believing that emotions were liabilities," he said quietly, his voice laced with vulnerability. "I thought that by keeping people at arm's length, I could avoid the pain I witnessed in my own family. But standing here with you, I can't help but wonder if I've been missing out on something truly meaningful." Marigold listened intently, her eyes never leaving his. "Sometimes," she replied gently, "the things we fear most are the very things that can set us free. I used to hide my true self behind art and ambition because I was afraid of being hurt. But I've learned that vulnerability is not a weakness, it's what makes us human." Her words, simple yet profound, resonated deeply with Soren, stirring emotions he had long suppressed. Before they knew it, the gallery's final hours approached, and the soft murmur of departing guests filled the room. Reluctantly, they agreed to part ways that night, each promising to meet again soon. As Marigold stepped out into the cool night air, Soren lingered at the doorway, watching her disappear into the city's tapestry of lights and shadows. The encounter had ignited something within him, a flicker of hope that perhaps his meticulously built world of deals and detachment could accommodate the messy, unpredictable beauty of real connection. On his way back to his penthouse, Soren replayed every word of their conversation, every glance that had passed between them. The accidental hug, once a momentary lapse, now felt like a catalyst that had irrevocably altered his life's trajectory. In the silent solitude of his luxurious elevator ride upward, he resolved to change. He would search for a balance between the ruthless precision of business and the tender vulnerability that Marigold had awakened in him. Perhaps, he thought, fate had conspired in this moment to give him a second chance, a chance to embrace a love he had long denied. As the elevator doors opened onto his private floor, Soren stepped into the quiet luxury of his penthouse, a sense of anticipation and uncertainty mingling within him. The chance encounter at the art gallery had been only the beginning, and he knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. But for the first time in years, he felt the stirring of a heart ready to risk it all, to let go of the rigid barriers that had defined him for so long. And in that determination lay the promise of a future where true love, unexpected and transformative, might finally flourish. After the art gallery reunion, Soren and Marigold found themselves drawn to a quiet, secluded corner of a nearby park, a hidden oasis away from the city's relentless pace and the scrutinizing eyes of the art world. The twilight had deepened into a velvety dusk, and as they strolled along a winding cobblestone path lined with flickering lanterns, the initial spark between them began to glow steadily. The cool air, tinged with the faint scent of wet leaves and distant rain, seemed to carry whispers of secrets waiting to be shared. For hours, they walked side by side in companionable silence, each step measured and unhurried. Finally, after a pause near a small, rustic bridge arching over a gentle stream, Marigold broke the silence. "Soren, can I ask you something personal?" she ventured, her voice soft yet carrying an unmistakable edge of vulnerability. He glanced at her, his eyes reflecting the flickering light, and nodded. "Of course. You can ask me anything." Marigold hesitated for a moment, gathering her courage as she looked down at the rippling water below before meeting his gaze again. "I've been wondering, why did you build those walls around yourself? I mean, you're so successful, yet I sense a loneliness behind that impenetrable exterior. What happened to you? What made you swear off real connection?" Her words were gentle but unyielding, as though she sought to peel away layers of carefully guarded secrets. Soren's pace faltered as he considered her question. He inhaled deeply, as if trying to summon the strength to reveal his long-buried truths. "I suppose," he began slowly, "that I grew up surrounded by chaos. My parents' bitter divorce was a spectacle, filled with accusations, broken promises, and endless legal battles. I watched everything disintegrate, and I swore then that I'd never let anyone have the power to break me apart. I told myself that if I kept everything at arm's length, I'd be in control. I even promised myself that I'd never allow love to entangle me, not even for a fleeting moment." His voice wavered slightly, the raw honesty shining through. "It was my way of protecting myself, of ensuring that nothing could disrupt the empire I was building." Marigold listened intently, her eyes softening with empathy. "But isn't it strange," she asked quietly, "that by trying to shield yourself, you ended up isolating the very part of you that craves connection? I can see the strength in you, but also the sadness, a loneliness that lingers in the quiet moments." Her words were a balm, gentle yet piercing in their truth. Soren's gaze dropped to the ground, his expression unreadable for several long moments. "There were times I thought that detachment was my only salvation," he admitted, voice low and reflective. "I remember nights when I'd lie awake, surrounded by the empty glow of computer screens and congratulatory emails, yet feeling utterly alone. I convinced myself that vulnerability was a liability, a flaw that could be exploited by competitors, by those I'd once lost trust in." He paused, the weight of his confession heavy between them. "But then I met you, Marigold, and in that unexpected embrace at the airport, and later, here in this quiet moment, I realized that perhaps I'd been running from something that was the very essence of life. A silence fell between them, deep and resonant, as if the park itself held its breath. The soft rustle of leaves in the breeze and the distant murmur of water over the bridge seemed to underscore the gravity of the exchange. Marigold reached out and gently took his hand, her touch light yet steady. "Soren," she murmured, "I've always believed that the things we fear the most can sometimes lead us to the greatest joys. Love isn't a weakness, it's what makes us truly alive. Maybe it's time you let go of that vow, even if just a little." His eyes lifted to meet hers, the vulnerability in his gaze mingling with a cautious hope. "I've spent so long convincing myself that isolation was the only way to protect what I built," he said, his voice catching slightly. "But now, with you, I'm beginning to see that maybe I've been denying myself the chance to feel real happiness." The confession hung in the air, fragile yet electrifying, as though the truth had the power to both liberate and shatter him. They continued their walk, the conversation deepening into shared reflections on past regrets and the possibility of second chances. Marigold spoke of her own scars, a love lost to betrayal and the lingering fear of vulnerability that had once kept her guarded. Soren listened with an intensity that made his usual stoicism crumble, each word from her drawing him closer to a future he had long thought unattainable. As they reached the edge of the park, where the city's lights began to twinkle against the darkening sky, Soren paused and turned to her. "I want to change," he said, voice firm yet trembling with emotion. "Not just for my business, but for myself, for the chance to experience something genuine." Marigold smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Then let's take that step together," she whispered. "Sometimes, the most unexpected encounters can lead us exactly where we need to be." In that moment, beneath the soft glow of street lamps and the gentle murmur of the city at night, Soren Blackwood and Marigold Fairfax stood on the cusp of a new beginning. Their shared vulnerability and the unraveling of old vows promised a future filled with both challenges and the transformative power of love, a future that neither had ever dared to imagine. That night, the city of New York transformed into a landscape of shimmering reflections and whispered secrets as Soren and Marigold prepared to face the inevitable reckoning of their unfolding connection. After their unexpected reunion at the art gallery and the tender conversation in the quiet park, both knew that their next encounter would no longer be a casual meeting, it would be a turning point where past defenses might finally be surrendered to possibility. Soren had arranged to meet Marigold at a rooftop restaurant that overlooked the city's restless skyline. The venue was an intimate, dimly lit space with twinkling fairy lights draped across a pergola, and a warm, amber glow from candles flickering on each table. As he arrived, Soren's heart pounded with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. His mind replayed every moment from earlier that week, the clandestine search for her name, the serendipitous encounter in Soho, and that vulnerable conversation by the park bridge. Tonight, he would have to confront not only his own guarded heart but also the precarious balance between his ruthless business persona and the genuine affection that had unexpectedly taken root. Marigold was already seated at a secluded table in the corner, her auburn hair softly illuminated by the gentle light, and her eyes reflecting a mix of hope and caution. When she saw him approach, she offered a small, uncertain smile, as though bracing herself for a confrontation with a man she both admired and feared. Soren pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down, his usual confident composure tempered by an unmistakable vulnerability. They began with tentative conversation about trivial details, the crisp air, the soft music in the background, the stunning view of the city, but it wasn't long before the weight of their shared past pressed in on them. Soren's voice dropped to a hushed tone as he admitted, "I've been fighting against this feeling for so long, this idea that I must never allow anyone to get too close. I built my life on discipline and detachment because I thought that was the only way to avoid the pain I witnessed growing up." His eyes searched hers for any sign of judgment, but in Marigold's gaze he found only understanding. Marigold reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against his hand, as if to offer silent reassurance. "I used to believe that too," she whispered. "I spent years hiding behind my work and my art, thinking that if I never let anyone in, I wouldn't have to be hurt. But I've learned that the risk of love is far greater than the regret of never having truly lived. Her words, though soft, carried the weight of all the years she'd spent guarded against vulnerability. The conversation deepened as the night wore on. They traded stories of missed opportunities and quiet regrets, the loneliness that had haunted Soren in the sterile boardrooms of his empire, and the bittersweet memories of past loves that Marigold had buried beneath layers of paint and canvas. Soren confessed that in his relentless pursuit of success, he had built walls so high that he often wondered if he was even capable of connection. "I always thought that by avoiding love, I was protecting myself," he said, voice raw with honesty. "But tonight, I realize that I've been isolated, living in a fortress of my own making." Marigold's eyes glistened with empathy as she shared how she had once believed that art was her only refuge from the chaos of her past relationships, but that deep down, she longed for someone who could see past her guarded exterior and appreciate her true self. "It's as if we were both running from something," she mused, only to find that what we were really afraid of was being truly seen. As the rain began to patter softly against the rooftop's glass panels, their conversation reached a crescendo of raw emotion. Soren leaned forward, his eyes intense, and said, "I want to try. I want to tear down these walls, even if it means risking everything. I want to see if love can truly be transformative, if it can heal the fractures of my past." His words, spoken with trembling conviction, hung between them like fragile glass. For a long, breathless moment, they simply stared at one another, each silently weighing the immense risk and the profound promise contained in that declaration. Then, as if the universe itself had finally given them permission, Marigold closed the distance between them. Her hand reached up, gently cupping his cheek as their eyes locked in a tender, unspoken vow. Their first kiss that night was both hesitant and all-consuming, a melding of hearts that had long been closed off to each other. In that kiss, Soren felt every barrier he had built begin to crumble, replaced by the possibility of a life filled with genuine connection rather than cold detachment. The hours slipped by unnoticed as they talked, laughed, and even shed tears in the quiet intimacy of the rooftop. The conversation shifted from their troubled pasts to dreams of a future they might create together, a future where the billionaire wasn't defined solely by his empire, and where the woman with the guarded heart could finally let someone in. They spoke of taking small steps, of carving out moments in the chaos of their lives to nurture something real and unplanned. By the time the restaurant's lights dimmed to signal the end of the evening, Soren and Marigold knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The accidental embrace at the airport had been the spark that ignited this night of reckoning, and now, with their hearts laid bare under the gentle glow of the city, they had taken the first step toward rewriting their stories. As they stepped out into the rain-soaked night, hand in hand, the world around them seemed to whisper that true love, unexpected, transformative, and profoundly messy, was indeed worth every risk. Soren spent the early hours of that fateful Tuesday with a knot of apprehension in his stomach. The storm of corporate turbulence was gathering force, and whispers of scandal and dissent had reached every corner of Kingsphere Tower. As he sat in his private office, high above the restless city, he stared out at the darkening skyline, lost in thought. The board was uneasy, rumors about his personal life and his impulsive break from his lifelong vow were beginning to create cracks in his once unassailable image. Every notification ping from his phone seemed to bring another reminder of mounting questions, and he knew that today's board meeting could either seal his fate or become a turning point in his rebirth. Across the building, in the softly lit conference room where the board had gathered, tension was palpable. Soren entered with Marigold at his side, her calm presence a steadying influence amid the undercurrents of suspicion in corporate politics. The room was filled with a mix of sharply dressed directors and investors, whose murmurs filled the silence as they took their seats. At the head of the table, Soren took a measured breath before beginning his address, his voice even yet laced with the weight of his recent revelations. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "our company has always prided itself on both financial acumen and strategic foresight. Today, I want to address the concerns that have been circulating regarding our philanthropic initiatives and, admittedly, some aspects of my personal life." A collective murmur rippled through the room. Marigold's eyes met his for a brief, reassuring moment before he continued. I understand that my recent decisions, especially those that reflect a more personal involvement in our charitable campaigns, have raised questions. But I assure you, these initiatives are not distractions. They are strategic moves designed to foster long-term goodwill and sustainable growth. A skeptical board member leaned forward, his tone icy. Mr. Blackwood, you've built Kingsphere on cold, calculated decisions. Recently, however, your actions suggest a deviation from that principle. Are we to believe that personal vulnerability and a softened image will not compromise the company's profitability? Soren's gaze swept over the assembled faces, his expression steady despite the fire in his chest. I believe, he said slowly, that embracing one's humanity is not a weakness, it's a strength. For too long, I cloaked myself in detachment, believing that emotions were liabilities. But I now see that they are the very source of creativity and resilience. Our philanthropic ventures, particularly those aimed at supporting maternal and child health, are yielding results that speak for themselves. He paused, allowing the silence to hang before adding, I have nothing to hide. Yes, my personal life has changed, and yes, I now allow myself to care deeply. But this change has made me a better leader, one who understands that compassion and profitability are not mutually exclusive. Marigold, seated quietly at his side, interjected softly, we have solid data from our pilot programs and community engagements that demonstrate not only increased public support but also a positive impact on long-term growth. This isn't about sentimentality, it's about reinvention. Her measured tone and steady gaze lent strength to his words, even as murmurs of uncertainty still fluttered among a few directors. For a long, tense moment, the board members exchanged glances, their eyes narrowing as they absorbed the unexpected candor in Soren's admission. One influential investor, Everett Mallory, cleared his throat. Mr. Blackwood, can you assure us that these personal choices won't distract from your fiduciary responsibilities? We need to know that your newfound vulnerability will not translate into erratic decision-making. Soren's eyes hardened slightly at the challenge. Everett, my record speaks for itself. I have always delivered results, and I intend to continue doing so. My personal transformation does not undermine my commitment to this company, it enhances it by allowing me to lead with both head and heart. His voice, though calm, carried the conviction of a man who had already begun to embrace a new paradigm. The investor leaned back, his skepticism not entirely quelled but tempered by the sincerity in Soren's tone. The meeting continued with detailed discussions about the Eco-Cities initiative and other projects, but the lingering focus on Soren's personal evolution remained a silent undercurrent throughout the session. Marigold's presence provided an unspoken reassurance, and as the board finally adjourned with a mandate for further review in a few weeks, Soren felt the weight of the confrontation slowly lift, replaced by a cautious optimism. Later that evening, after the board members had dispersed and the corridors of Kingsphere Tower fell into a reflective hush, Soren and Marigold slipped away to a quiet, private lounge on a mezzanine level. The room was modestly furnished with plush chairs and soft lighting, a stark contrast to the clinical austerity of the boardroom. There, away from the prying eyes of the corporate world, Soren's guard finally began to lower. I won't lie, he confessed, his voice barely more than a whisper as they sat side by side, today was one of the hardest days I've faced in a long time. I felt the full force of every rumor and every doubt about who I am. His eyes searched Marigold's, seeking the solace that had become her silent promise. I realized that if I continue to hide behind that vow of detachment, I might lose everything, my company, my reputation, and perhaps even the chance at a real, meaningful connection. Marigold reached out, her hand warm against his. Soren, sometimes the things we fear most are the very things that can set us free. The board may never understand the full measure of your journey, but I believe that by embracing who you truly are, flaws, passions, and all, you'll not only be a better leader but a happier man. Her words, soft yet unwavering, filled the space between them with a sense of hope that was both fragile and fierce. For a long, reflective moment, they sat in silence, the soft hum of the building's ventilation and the distant sounds of the city forming a gentle background score. Soren's mind raced with the implications of what he had just confessed in the boardroom, the tension between maintaining control and allowing vulnerability. "I've built walls so high, I thought they'd protect me forever," he murmured, voice tinged with regret. "But tonight, I see that those walls have become prisons. I want to be free, Marigold, free to feel, to connect, and to love without fear." She squeezed his hand gently, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Then let's take that first step," she said, voice trembling with emotion. "Together." As the night deepened, they remained in the quiet lounge, their conversation drifting from the day's corporate battles to memories of their past and dreams of a future unbound by old vows and rigid expectations. In that sacred, unguarded space, Soren Blackwood realized that embracing vulnerability might be the greatest risk he had ever taken, and yet, it was the only risk worth taking if it meant reclaiming a part of himself that had been lost to fear for too long. By the time they finally parted ways, each carried with them the profound understanding that the challenges ahead were immense, but the promise of a future where true connection reigned was even greater. Soren walked back to his penthouse with a resolute heart, determined to face the consequences of his transformation. And as Marigold disappeared into the night, she felt a stirring of hope, a belief that their shared vulnerability might one day blossom into the kind of love that transcended the cold calculations of the past. In that quiet, transitional moment, the echoes of the boardroom confrontation and the raw emotions of the private lounge mingled together, heralding the dawn of a new era for Soren Blackwood, a man willing to risk it all for the possibility of genuine, transformative love. Late one evening, as the city's neon glow battled the encroaching darkness over Manhattan, Soren Blackwood's meticulously ordered world began to unravel in ways he never anticipated. After weeks of cautiously nurturing his budding relationship with Marigold Fairfax, strange whispers and subtle shifts in behavior among his trusted staff had begun to coalesce into something more sinister. It started with an anonymous email, cryptic and unsigned, warning him that someone close was intent on exploiting his newfound vulnerability for personal gain. The message insinuated that delicate details of his past and his recent, unguarded moments with Marigold were being quietly fed to the tabloids, threatening to morph his private transformation into a public scandal. In the days that followed, tension in the office grew palpable. Colleagues exchanged furtive glances, and the usual respectful nods that accompanied his entrance were now replaced by a subdued murmur of discontent. Soren's assistant, Darian, pulled him aside one afternoon, voice low and urgent. "Sir, there's been a series of unusual memos and offhand remarks during board meetings, suggestions that our internal communications are being compromised. It seems someone within our circle is deliberately stirring up trouble." Soren's heart sank as he realized the betrayal might come from someone he had trusted implicitly. The thought of a confidant using his emotional openness against him cut deeper than any business setback ever had. That night, unable to sleep, Soren pored over his emails and security logs in his penthouse office. The digital trail was subtle but undeniable, a series of leaked messages, disguised as casual gossip, hinted at an insider's hand in framing him as a soft, emotionally compromised leader. The betrayal wasn't coming from an external enemy, it was originating from within, from someone who had always been in his inner circle. With a heavy heart and a mind swirling with suspicion, he decided to confront the matter head-on. The following morning, in a tense, hushed meeting in a private conference room on the 47th floor, Soren faced Jasper Lyle, his longtime business partner and one of the few people he had allowed close. Jasper's normally affable demeanor was replaced by a guarded, almost resigned expression as he admitted, "I've been under pressure, Soren. Investors are nervous, they believe that exposing some of your personal choices might, in their eyes, weaken your leadership. I never meant for it to go this far, but someone thought it would be a profitable angle." His words fell like lead in the silent room, and Soren felt an unexpected mixture of anger and profound sadness. How could someone he trusted, someone who had shared years of hard-fought victories, be complicit in undermining him? Marigold Fairfax, who had been discreetly summoned to the meeting by a concerned executive, watched the exchange with a furrowed brow. When Jasper finished speaking, the room was thick with tension. Soren's voice, usually so measured, cracked as he demanded, "Who is it that's been leaking these details? I need names, evidence, everything." Jasper's silence was damning. In that moment, Soren's mind raced back to the accidental hug at the airport, to the genuine vulnerability that had drawn him to Marigold. He had risked everything to allow that connection to blossom, and now that very openness was being weaponized against him. After the meeting, Soren retreated to a quiet corner of his office, head in his hands. Marigold soon joined him, her presence a soothing balm amidst the storm. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, reaching out to gently touch his arm. "I never wanted your personal life to become a liability." Soren looked up, eyes dark with both betrayal and remorse. "I thought I could control it, shield myself with detachment," he confessed, his voice heavy with regret. "But vulnerability isn't something you can confine. It's meant to be shared, even if it leaves you exposed." Marigold's gaze softened as she replied, "Maybe this is our chance to turn the tables. Instead of letting them exploit your truth, we can own it. Show them that true strength lies in embracing every part of who you are." Her words ignited something in Soren, a spark of defiance and hope. That evening, in a quiet, private dinner arranged at a secluded rooftop restaurant, they plotted a strategy. Over candlelit tables and the distant hum of the city, Soren resolved to reclaim his narrative. He would hold a press conference that very week, not to apologize for his personal choices, but to celebrate the courage it took to let love in. With Marigold by his side, he planned to reveal the truth about his past, the truth that vulnerability had taught him, that the mistakes he had made were stepping stones to becoming a better leader and a more complete man. In that moment, as the night deepened and the city lights shimmered around them, Soren and Marigold forged an unspoken pact, to face the betrayal head-on, to let their shared truth shine even in the face of corporate machinations, and to transform scandal into a powerful narrative of redemption and love. The betrayal, painful as it was, had exposed the fragile yet formidable strength that lay beneath Soren's carefully constructed facade. And as they clinked glasses in a quiet toast to new beginnings, they both knew that, regardless of the challenges ahead, they had found in each other the courage to risk everything for the possibility of genuine connection. The morning after the press conference, Manhattan awoke under a soft haze of pastel light that seemed to signal the start of something fresh. Soren Blackwood stepped out of his high-rise, his tailored suit immaculate and his demeanor more at ease than it had been in years. The tumult of the previous week, the boardroom battle, the public scrutiny, the internal betrayal, had not vanished, but it had shifted into something resolute and hopeful. Instead of the cold detachment he once wielded as a shield, he now carried a quiet confidence born of vulnerability and honest transformation. At Kingsphere Tower, the corridors that had once buzzed with anxious whispers now hummed with a new narrative. Journalists and investors, while still curious, had begun to commend Soren's unorthodox yet genuine display of accountability. His announcement that he would no longer hide behind old vows of emotional detachment, that he was ready to embrace the responsibilities of fatherhood and love, had sent shockwaves through the corporate world. Though some skeptics still lingered in the background, the overwhelming sentiment was one of cautious optimism. Soren's transformation was being woven into the company's new strategic vision, a future where profit and purpose walked hand in hand. That afternoon, Soren invited Marigold Fairfax to join him on the penthouse terrace for a quiet celebration. The terrace overlooked a sprawling view of the city, with skyscrapers bathed in golden sunlight and the distant murmur of traffic forming a gentle backdrop. Marigold arrived in a simple, elegant dress that perfectly matched the understated ambience of the scene. For a long while, they stood side by side in comfortable silence, each lost in thought as they surveyed the city that had witnessed so much change in their lives. "I never imagined I'd see this day," Marigold murmured, her voice soft but filled with meaning. "To see you so open, so willing to share the truth about who you really are, it's like watching a person shed years of armor in a single night." Soren's eyes met hers with a tenderness that belied his earlier ruthlessness. "I used to think that vulnerability was a weakness," he confessed, but now I know that it's the foundation of true strength. Every painful secret, every sacrifice I made to keep my heart locked away, it all led me here, to this moment." He paused, allowing his words to sink in as the warmth of the afternoon enveloped them both. Over glasses of crisp white wine, they talked about the road ahead. Soren shared his plans to restructure Kingsphere's philanthropic wing, ensuring that the company would be as committed to community well-being as it was to financial growth. He spoke of investing in programs for maternal and child health, of creating scholarship funds for underprivileged youth, and even of setting up mentorship initiatives to help guide the next generation of entrepreneurs. Marigold listened intently, her own dreams of a life steeped in genuine connection and creative expression echoing in her words. In return, she revealed how the reunion had awakened old passions and slowly healed scars that she had carried for far too long. "I've spent so many years afraid to trust again," she admitted, "but with you, I feel like I can finally let down my guard." As the sun began its slow descent and the city lights twinkled into life, their conversation took on a quieter, more reflective tone. Soren recalled the days when the board's whispers and internal betrayals had nearly shattered his resolve. He admitted that the pain of being exploited by those he had once considered allies had forced him to confront his own deepest fears, the fear of being loved, and in turn, of loving too much. Marigold reached out, gently brushing a tear from his cheek. "We all make mistakes," she whispered. "But what matters is that we learn from them, that we open ourselves to new possibilities. Today, you're not the distant, untouchable CEO everyone expected. You're a man who has taken a courageous step toward living honestly." In that moment, Soren realized that his transformation was not just about saving his company's image, it was about reclaiming a part of himself that he had long suppressed. The vow he once held so dear, the vow to keep love at a safe distance, now seemed like a relic of a past he no longer wanted to repeat. With Marigold's steady presence beside him, he felt emboldened to take risks he had never allowed himself before. The night grew deep and cool, and as they sat together on the terrace, the city sprawled out before them like a tapestry of endless possibilities. Soren took Marigold's hand and, with a voice filled with both resolve and tenderness, said, "I'm ready to face whatever comes next. I want to build something real, not just for myself, but for everyone who believes that love can transform even the most hardened hearts." Marigold's eyes shone with quiet determination as she squeezed his hand in return. "Then let's take that leap," she replied. "Together, we can rewrite our story, no matter how unpredictable the path may be." In that final, profound moment, as the cool night air mingled with the gentle glow of city lights, Soren and Marigold embraced a future unbound by past vows and scarred memories. They knew challenges still lay ahead, public scrutiny, lingering doubts from skeptical board members, and the personal journey of healing that would take time. Yet, with hearts now open and a shared commitment to honesty, they stepped forward into the darkness, where every risk was a promise of a brighter, more genuine tomorrow. The accidental embrace at the airport had been the catalyst, but it was now their determined will to love that would chart the course for the rest of their lives.